John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles head coach Doug Peterson speaking today. One of the key elements was the role of one LeGarrette Blount. Yesterday, John, you shot down on the show that his job was in any jeopardy, and I think a lot of people agreed with you there. However, today it was brought up to Doug Peterson, and he kind of made a pretty definitive answer as to the status of one LeGarrette Blount. In fact, he thinks he's going to have a really big role in the team. Called him a beast.
Yeah, he did. Said he's going to be a big part of the offense, and that's the plan, as I kind of said yesterday on the show. Not to say the plan's going to work, but certainly there's been nothing to this point that would make them deviate it. And I think Doug did the people a good service by kind of explaining the nature of the preseason, the fact that he's had 9 rushes for 17 yards. A lot of times you're just evaluating specific situations and specific players, and I point to those stretch runs specifically because, in theory, those are not the type of runs you want to give to LeGarrette Blount, but you're just trying to block them. You're also looking at offensive linemen on the particular play, and the tight ends, and maybe even the receivers who have a block that they need to get. So you're not game planning for the opponent. And you guys kind of talked a little bit about it yesterday, and the fact that what can you take out of preseason, what do you shrug off, and the fact that you really have to understand they're not game planning for the opponent. So they're not trying necessarily to put LeGarrette Blount in a position to succeed. They're just trying to look at particular plays and evaluate those plays, and it's different, obviously, than the regular season.
He was asked the question. He said the question was worded as there's been some speculation about LeGarrette Blount standing on the team. Did his reaction kind of look like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, it was. That's basically what his reaction was. In fact, I think he said, I don't know what to tell you. He's kind of sighed it, and then he called him a beast. And it's what the speculation is directly related towards his contract because he hasn't performed well. He didn't sign for a lot of money, and the Eagles could move on, and it wouldn't hurt them basically at all from a salary cap standpoint.
Right.
So they basically have $400,000 of dead money, which is nothing. So if he does fall flat on his face, they could easily move on. So I think that's where the speculation came from. And then you have the Corey Clement aspect of this. But, I mean, you got to be realistic. I'm rooting for the kid also. I mean, he's Glassboro native. Everyone likes to see somebody like that make good in the NFL. But this is a team that has playoff aspirations. You can't go into a season with Corey Clement or even Wendell Smallwood as your lead back. And LeGarrette Blount's coming off a Super Bowl and an 18-touchdown season.
Right.
He's a part of this team.
Right. Well, it sounded like if you listened to Frank Reich at all yesterday that Wendell Smallwood, not only his standing on the team is very secure, they look at him as a pretty key part to the team.
Yeah, no question. It's very secure, and that's another thing I wrote about last week. Well, I think you were still going because people were saying, well, could Clement take Smallwood's spot? And no. No. I mean, you hear the coaches talk about certain players. In Doug's case, Nick Foles was out again with the elbow injury, and people have said, well, maybe Matt McMullen could take his spot as the backup quarterback. No, absolutely not. Doug said, I don't need to see anything from Nick Foles. They're just managing him. Deuce Staley said the same thing about Wendell, and then Frank Reich kind of seconded it yesterday. And it's like, we know what we have with Wendell Smallwood. He doesn't have to prove what type of player he is. What he has to figure out is how to stay on the field.
Right. That's the big problem with him so far, right? I mean, because the way that Reich talked yesterday, I mean, they sounded like they were speaking glowingly of Smallwood. Now, I thought Smallwood caught some ire earlier saying, look, I was out of shape last year. Does he look different to you?
Well, I think he knows what to expect. I mean, he didn't look out of shape last year, but there's a difference between being in shape, I always say, being in NFL shape and being a normal person in shape. And from a normal person standpoint, Wendell was in great shape last year, but he felt he didn't know, he didn't do what he needed to do to stand up through an NFL season. And maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but he's certainly doing more this time around. And the Eagles feel very, very comfortable with him. I think, you know, they would like him to be on the field for the first 2 preseason games, but he wasn't able. And that's not a concern if he's there week 1. But you have to, can he make it through 16 games? I don't know. But if you look at his skill set, and the one thing Frank Reich said, is he's a better 3rd-down back than they thought, and that he can catch the football. He's improved for pass protection. And then you add into the fact he might be this team's best kick returner, and he took one back to the house. So you have that special teams aspect, and you see how valuable he is and how limited Clement is, who basically is just a pretty good runner. He still has to learn how to be a receiver in this league. He still has to learn when it comes to pass protection. He certainly can't return kickoffs. You can see the value's not the same. The practice squad is made for kids like Clement because they're projects, and that's where you want him. He's got a future in this league, but he's still got to develop.
John McMullen's with us, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider. John, how comfortable are the Eagles with the offensive line right now? We've been talking running backs, but the line hasn't been very good in the 2 preseason games so far. Then they trade Tobin, they trade Alan Barbary. They must think they've got good depth.
Yeah, and they did have good depth. They had great depth. I'm not sure it's as good as they think it is any longer. I mean, they traded away 2 veteran guys who played a lot of football. In the case of Alan Barber, I don't think they wanted to trade him. I think that was sort of a two-way street, and that Alan wants to be a starter, was very unhappy. The Eagles were going to go with Isaac Seumalo at left guard. They would have loved for him to stay around and be the backup swing tackle on game day, but he was just going to be so unhappy. They got him out of here. And now when you're looking at it, they have a ton of confidence in Big V as being a backup tackle, but he's a very young player, and you all saw him last year. He struggled at times. Now he's got to fill that Alan Barber role and be that swing tackle that has to come in if either Jason Peters or Lane Johnson gets dinged up. And then you have Dylan Gordon, who is a tremendously athletic guy trying to take the same route Jason Peters once did. He was a tight end in college at LSU. So he's lined up as an extra tight end. He's lined up at left tackle. He's lined up at fullback in training camp and in the preseason. And the Eagles like him a lot, but he's still a work in progress. So they have guys with high ceilings maybe, but you're certainly not as comfortable with their depth if, say, Alan Barber was still here.
John, as we're talking with you, I see a tweet come by that the Chargers center, Max Turk, suspended first 4 games of the 2017 season for violating the NFL policy on performance-enhancing substances. I see a center get suspended, and the first thing my radar says is, oh, Jason Kelsey, Chargers, could that happen?
Well, you never say never with Howie Roseman, but I don't think so. I no longer think they're thinking about moving Jason Kelsey for this season. I do ultimately think this could be his last season in Philadelphia. And, hey, if they could get something of value, they still have tremendous depth on the interior because of Stefan Wisniewski. So he could step in and play center. They could move Seumalo to center and put Chance Warmack in at left guard. So they do have options if they think they could get a really nice package in return. But I don't think that's going to happen at this point. I think Jason Kelsey's the starting center, and the Eagles will tell you one of the issues in the first 2 games is the starters haven't been out there. They haven't been together. Brandon Brooks has been out the first game. Then Jason Peters had a personal issue he had to take care of. Lane Johnson had to flip to the left side. Big V was hurt. He was not able to play. They had to start Matt Tobin the week before he gets traded. So when they have Peters and Sayamalo and Kelsey and Brooks and Johnson out there at the same time, which they think they're going to have for week 3, then they're fine.
One more offensive line question for me. How about the converted defensive end who's now on the offensive line? How's the Taylor Hart project look from what you've seen?
Well, I think today was the first time Taylor's name was mentioned by anyone around the Eagles, and that's because Barber's gone and Tobin's gone. So now, as I said, the backups are Vaitai and Dylan Gordon. But let's say one of them gets hurt. Well, then who's next? It's got to be Taylor Hart, who used to, as you mentioned, Pete, used to be a 5-technique defensive end brought in by Chip Kelly, trying to make the move to right tackle. And you also have Victor Swatko, who's an undrafted free agent from Oklahoma State. So all of a sudden, that vaunted depth is no longer that deep. I will say on one-on-ones, Taylor really held up well against Cameron Wake, and that's pretty impressive. So he is improving, but obviously he's a very raw guy. I mean, it's difficult to make that transition at the NFL level.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. And today you asked the question to Doug about the offensive line. It sounds like Vaitai is going to kind of be the Alan Barber minus the guard play.
Yeah, he's going to be the swing tackle. And remember, though, he's coming off a knee injury, so he was out. And once it's all of a sudden, what I was talking about is you have razor-thin depth now. If one guy, and you hope it's not the starters, obviously, because Jason Peters and Lane Johnson are both top 10 level players at their position. But even if it's a Vaitai, even if it's a Dylan Gordon, then you're down to Taylor Hart, or you're down to an undrafted free agent.
That's a good point.
And that's where Matt Tobin is looking pretty good. But then again, from Howie Roseman's standpoint, you can't legislate injuries in this league. And the fact that you're able to get a 5th-round draft choice for a guy who's not in your plans, even though you have to spin a 7th-rounder in return as well, that's pretty good.
Yep, they get the 5th-round pick for Tobin. They sent a 7th-round pick and Tobin to Seattle. That was right after we got off the air last night, and he's the second depth guy that they've gotten rid of. So, as you said, it kind of brings down the depth a little bit here, but they feel pretty good.
About the numbers too today. How many guys are they going to keep on the offensive line? How many can you dress for a game? That type stuff too. I thought that number was interesting. They kept 10 last year. How many will they keep this year?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to keep 10 anymore. I thought that was a possibility when Allen was still here. I thought they had so many bodies. It's pretty clear that Jeff Stoutland wants Chance Warmack to be a part of this team. So Wisniewski and Warmack are going to be the inside guys. And then you would project Vaitai and Gordon as the outside guys. So that would get you to 9. Unless there's an injury, I don't see somebody else jumping up and winning a spot. But you would almost think it would have to be a guy who could play tackle, and that's where Taylor Hart comes in, or Victor Solatko.
Right.
And I just don't think they're ready to play at the NFL level.
Hey, John, we were talking with Teron Davenport in the last hour, and he really spoke glowingly of Darby. Really thought that he brought the whole defense together now because it gives him a guy that can play the ball and do some things. And we had some text messages saying, hey, slam the brakes on Darby. But give us your, take now that you've kind of seen him in there for a week. You saw him a little bit last week on what he really adds to the defense.
Well, he adds a ton. Teron and I have talked about that on the practice field. I also think he's the final piece of what essentially is going to be a top 10 defense if they're healthy, because he turns what was a weak position on paper into one that's at least average and could even be better, depending on the improvement of Jalen Mills and how whoever handles the slot, whether it's Patrick Robinson, Ron Brooks, Malcolm Jenkins, however they sort of divvy that out. So it's very, very important. What he is, I can't even tell you the last time the Eagles had a guy with that kind of recovery speed. I mean, he can run sub 4.4 and you just see him break on the ball. The talk in Buffalo, the question is, and it's legitimate. You have to ask yourself, why is a team giving up on a 23-year-old corner who was runner-up for Defensive Rookie of the Year?
Right.
That raises some red flags. But Sean McDermott is now the head coach in Buffalo, and you saw what happened in Carolina with Josh Norman. Buffalo's going to play a ton of cover 3. That's what Sean likes to play. They play zone coverage. And Ron Brooks is a press coverage guy. So from their standpoint, it was, why do we need a press coverage guy who we're going to have to pay a heck of a lot in a couple of years when we can just plug in somebody who understands how to play zone? So that's the reason they moved on, and Jim Schwartz wants that ability to have a press coverage guy. So I think it fit from both sides of the trade, and he's just a huge upgrade. I'm not trying to say he's Deion Sanders, but he is a significant upgrade from what was here.
We got John time, not prime time right here. It's John McMullen on the Sports Bash with us. So, John, I know Doug was asked today about Jordan Hicks. He was asked about Brandon Graham and their injury status. On the topic of Jordan Hicks, is he injury-prone or does he just have bad luck? Can he be counted on health-wise?
I think he can. Well, obviously the broken hand, that was bad luck on his honeymoon, slipping when he was outside the pool. Depending on who you believe, Doug, I don't even think if he was clear. Doug is going the hockey route. He's going upper body, lower body now on us. But Jeff McClain pressed him, and he said quad. I had heard groin. Either way, I saw him after practice. He was jogging off. He looked completely healthy. He looked fine. He looked like he could have played if it were the regular season. I think the Eagles are just being very, very cautious with both of those players. You're not going to see them again in the preseason, nor should you. And they'll both be ready for week 1. You do have to worry with Jordan Hicks because of his history dating back to Texas. But he did play every game last year, so hopefully he's gotten over that hump.
John McMullen, 97.3, ESPN.com. Eagles-Dolphins Thursday night right here on 97.3. And in that game, what's your feeling on how much we'll see, some of these guys, specifically, that offensive line, which hasn't played a whole heck of a lot. But I can't imagine. It seems that less and less these guys play more. It seems like every year they're getting less and less opportunities to actually get out there. So it's probably going to be the last time we see Carson Wentz. You might not see him all that much either. The line hasn't played all that much. But did Doug give any insight on how much he anticipates them playing Thursday night?
No, he kind of went into his philosophy a little bit, but he hasn't made the decision. I think the fact that the Dolphins have been here practicing with the Eagles will impact it as well because they got some work in from that standpoint. Normally in the third preseason game, you want the starters to play into the third quarter to sort of get that feel of coming out of the locker room and try to make it as real as possible towards a regular season game. But as you mentioned, Mike, things are changing in this league, and when you see how they're handling Brandon Graham and Jordan Hicks, how they've handled Nick Foles and Alshon Jeffrey, they're being very, very, very cautious. I wouldn't be surprised if things were scaled back. I would certainly expect the starters to play into the second quarter, but I'm not sure you'll see them into the third quarter.
All right, John, as we look forward to that game on Thursday night, what is right now the biggest roster battle left for you for Thursday night's game? What's one of the things that you're paying attention to?
Well, I think from a roster standpoint, I want to see how that back end of the receivers is going to look like. We talked about numbers on the offensive line. You also have to talk about numbers at that position without Jordan Matthews, because I thought when Jordan was here, it would certainly be 6. Now it might be 5. But if it is 6, it's going to be interesting because it's a battle between the Marcus Johnsons of the world and the Bryce Treggses and the Shelton Gibsons. And Treggs has been injured. He was great in Green Bay. He hasn't been on the practice field since. I thought he was going to make the team, but you can't make the club in the tub, as they say. And Marcus was having a hamstring issue, and he was sort of lapping everybody. And ever since then, he's sort of come back to the pack a little bit. So I think that's still the most interesting position for depth purposes, and also because those guys might have to play at some point. If you're going to play 11 personnel consistently and have 3 receivers on the field 65, 70% of the time, maybe more, well, Jeffrey, Smith, and Aguilar can't be out there every single play. Somebody else has got to step up and give him a breather every now and again.
Matt Collins?
It could be Mac. I personally, he's going to make the team. He's not in the conversation of making the roster because they think his ceiling is so high and his special teams ability as well. I personally don't think he's ready to play at this point in the receiver rotation. And I think Marcus and Bryce Treggs have been ahead of him. But certainly he's a name in that conversation.
So, John, now we'll wrap up with a fun one. Where were you on November 14th of 1993 when Doug Peterson was leading Miami to a 19-14 win over the Eagles at the Vet and giving Don Shula that record-setting 325th win?
This is the 21st day of training camp, Pete. I don't remember where I was yesterday. My head's spinning. But, that question came out of nowhere. But, hey, Doug got a big smile on his face. And, obviously he compared that to the Super Bowl win when he was in Green Bay. He called it 1A and 1B. And he mentioned he threw it 6 times, which kind of tells you what kind of quarterback Doug Peterson is. But, hey, Doug was a survivor because he lasted over a decade in this league, and he didn't really have a ton of talent, let's be honest.
We got to witness that in 1999.
93.
No, 99.
99,
here.
We got to witness that real respectable.
Yeah, when we got to witness that for about 8 games, how little talent Doug actually had. All right, read John's article at 973ESPN.com. Blount remains a big part of Eagles' plans. He wrote that 1 hour ago, and you can read it at 973ESPN.com or follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. Thank you, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.